Carrie, you need to
Scroll
scroll.
Gotta scroll.
Okay. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this meeting has been given by prominently posting the 2020 resolution of the regularly scheduled meetings of the Planning Board of Princeton. A copy has been filed with the Clerk of Princeton on the 8th day of December 2019. Legal adoption of said resolution appeared in the December 20th, 2019 edition of the Princeton Packet. Notice of this meeting has been filed with the Clerk of Princeton on the 8th day of April and has been posted to the municipal website, www.princetonnj.gov/meetings. Choose the planning tab to view. Pursuant to Executive Order 107, due to the state of emergency in New Jersey regarding COVID-19 coronavirus, notice that during the declared state of emergency, all regular and special meetings of the Princeton Planning Board will be held electronically via Zoom and transmitted to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, and Times, and was filed with the Clerk of Princeton on the 8th day of April 2020. Such notices have been placed on the official bulletin board at the Princeton Municipal Complex and on the Princeton website, and are to be maintained throughout the year. And by transmitting a copy of the same to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, the Times, Trentonian, Comcast Media, and filing a copy thereof with the Clerk of Princeton. Notices have also been placed on all window doors of the municipal complex. Please note, as with regular in-person meetings, members of the public will have an opportunity at a specific point in the proceedings to comment and ask questions. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. Those wishing to comment orally should virtually raise their hand using the button at the bottom right of the participant panel, or if participating by phone, by pressing *9. Oral comments will be taken in the order in which hands were raised. Inappropriate public comment containing obscenity, hate speech, or relating to matters not before the board will be immediately muted. If you're having difficulty accessing this feature, use the Q&A dialogue box to let tech support know, and they will try to assist you.
Thank you, Carrie.
You're welcome.
Can you unshare your screen
Oh,
so
okay.
that folks can choose either speaker view or gallery view as they,
Wonderful.
Yes.
okay? Next on the agenda is announcements. Does anyone have an announcement? I have a brief one, but I want to, go ahead.
I was just gonna let the board know that we are in the process of recruiting a senior planner, and we have closed that recruitment period, and we received 9 applications. So we have 9 candidates. I'm reviewing the applications right now. We have some very strong candidates, so I'm excited about that. And we don't have a process set up yet. So I'll let you know as soon as that is in place. I'm working with Human Resources. But I did want to tell members of the board that if anyone's interested in participating in the interviews, just send me an email, let me know, and I'll keep it posted on the process.
Great, thank you. Any other announcements from members of the board or staff? I want to note that the Master Plan Committee met this past Monday and took action to pass up to the full board with its recommendation for adoption, the draft green building and environmental sustainability element of the master plan. So that is on the June 18th agenda, planning board agenda. Looking forward to that. So if there are no other announcements, let's consider the minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes. We have regular meeting of November 7th, 2019, the regular meeting of December 5th, 2019, and the regular meeting of December 12th, 2019. Would anyone like to move the November minutes?
I'll move.
Comments or?
Oh, I just want to say that I won't be voting on those. I wasn't present.
Okay.
Louise, also, I will not be voting on those since I was not on the board at the time.
Okay.
Tim moved it, I seconded.
And I have a question or a comment. On page 2, in discussion where we talk, the paragraph that begins, the next proposed checklist amendment is to include a request for a community impact statement. The sentence that begins, the material would be kept in the planning office and not be used during the approval process. I'm suggesting that we add the words site plan and subdivision before approval process, just to, I think we need it to be super clear when, I think this was a great addition, but I think having the master plan mentioned along with major site plans and major subdivisions, I think we need to differentiate there just to be absolutely clear.
Okay, so the sentence then reads, the material would be kept in the planning office and not be used during the site plan and subdivision approval process. Is that correct?
That's what I'm proposing.
Okay.
And I'd also point out in all of the sets of minutes that Councilwoman Sachs's last name is misspelled or has various spellings throughout. I don't think she's from the Sachs Fifth Avenue family. So I think it's S-A-C-K-S, not S-A-X.
I'm aware of that. I've made those changes. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you. So those who moved and seconded, are you amending, or as amended?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we noted 2 abstentions, correct?
Correct.
I am getting
Sorry, I'm an I. I was on mute. Sorry.
I have a phone call coming in from Wanda. Should I answer it? I think I should.
Yes.
Hi, Wanda.
Yeah.
Well, the meeting, we went ahead and began a few minutes ago, and Carrie read the opening statement. We've just adopted the first, or approved, excuse me, the first set of minutes. Were you not able to, and is this a Linux thing, or are you using the link that Mark Dashield sent around this afternoon? Okay, well, I won't repeat Wanda's curse, but she did curse. Gently, mildly.
Don't put it in the minutes.
So she is in holding. It says that she has to wait for the meeting to start. Is there? Do
Can you let her in?
There, Carrie or Mark?
I think Mark,
I think everyone can get in.
Everyone else got in. Yes, Wanda. We have a quorum, but we don't have every last member. But so I don't know whether Mia also is having a problem. She's not here.
Hey, Carrie, this is Christopher DeGrazia.
I'm
Yes,
sorry,
hi,
Wanda.
Chris. I'm
I-
sorry. Your name.
Rich Goldman
I'll keep going.
received the link
And,
from Mark, and he's having trouble the same way. He's getting the same message.
Who is? I'm sorry.
Rich Goldman, he's basically going to handle the hearing this evening, and he is using the link from Mark and getting the same message that it's on hold. Same as Wanda, that's why I interrupted to let you know they're having the same issue.
So Mark's name is showing as a participant. Are you actually there, Mark, or is it just open on your computer, maybe? Just wondering whether, I think he has the most depth of knowledge of the Zoom workings. Well,
I I don't have my phone with me, but I have his cell phone number. I'll go get my phone and I will call Mark.
Thank you, David.
Okay, okay. Yeah, he just said he's in now, so I gave him a,
Oh,
wait. Yep, he's in. I'm looking at the attendees list. So Rich Goldman was able to get in. I think he might have used a different link.
okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna back out and just let you guys move forward.
Thanks,
Nice to
Chris.
see you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
DeGrazia.
It's good seeing you.
Okay. So we have two more sets of minutes. The meeting of December 5th, 2019. Hearing, seeing none. Do I have a motion and a second for these minutes?
I missed both of these meetings, so I can't move them or vote on them.
I think half the board was recused on the first set, so.
I'll move these minutes. I was there.
I think I was there. I'll second it.
Motion to approve.
Okay. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? And several abstaining. Did you catch who? Carrie?
Yes, Julie, David, Tim, and, well, of those people present tonight.
Okay, good. And the third set of minutes is December 12th, 2019. Are there any comments or corrections?
I'll move approval.
I'm sorry, was that you, Tim?
Correct.
Thank
Tim
you.
moved. We have
I'll
yet
second.
to have a second. Zenon seconded. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining?
Abstain.
Sorry, Julie, yes. And you too, Owen?
That's right.
Okay,
I'm abstaining, yeah.
and David. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring in the university's team. Is it appropriate?
I think maybe I
Yeah.
start because I want to do a share screen. Do we have to do me first or?
Let me introduce the application first. And, well, actually, David, why don't you go ahead and,
I can do it while you're,
all right. This application is from the trustees of Princeton University. It's a concept review for the Princeton University Art Museum, Elm Drive and McCosh Walk, Central Campus, Block 45.01, Lot 101. And do we have everyone who needs to be let in, David?
I
Well,
think,
either way, I'm going to kick it to Michael.
Okay,
And
this is,
Michael, Mr. Goldman, I
this is-
know that you'll be carrying the
Right, so
water
ca-
university.
yeah, right, can you guys hear me? now?
Yes, sir, we can.
Yes.
Great, okay, okay.
All right, I'll be with you in a second. I just want to bring up a map.
Uh-huh.
Rich, you can see the screen. Is there anybody on the screen, anybody that should be on the screen that's actually not a panelist at this time? Anybody from your team?
No.
No, I think our panelists are all accounted for. Am I
Okay.
correct, panelists?
Yes, I'm here.
And do they have the ability to open their cameras, or is that restricted?
I thought they should be able to if they're a
Yeah.
panelist.
I agree with you.
Yeah, and the better protocol is to have them do so.
Yeah, Ron and James, can you open your,
My camera's
Video?
on.
Yes, I
Mine's
see
on.
James.
Oh, good.
Hi, welcome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can everyone see the map I put up, the campus map?
Yes.
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 And although this is only a concept review, let's mark exhibits, just so we have a record. So let's mark this as exhibit PB1. And Michael, if you could describe it, I'm not going to swear you in because it is just a concept review and we don't have to swear people in.
Sure, this is a map showing the central part of the main Princeton University campus. The source is Princeton University from its website. It's entitled an interactive campus map. So that's the item. That's what you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to start off with this to give you a little bit of an introduction as to the project and the location of the project and what's being proposed. Good evening, everyone. This project, this concept review is for a proposed new museum at Princeton University. The proposal is to largely replace the existing museum complex, which is housed in McCormick Hall. On the map before you, you see the central campus. I'm moving my pointer around. Here's Nassau Street at the upper left of your picture, Nassau Hall. And there's a walk that goes roughly north-south from Nassau Street, past several of the historic buildings on campus. And in a southerly direction, it brings you right to McCormick Hall. Currently, the main entrance to McCormick Hall is a little bit to the east of that walk. If you were walking on campus, you would turn onto McCosh Walk and then come into the main which is this area of
This.
the hall.
Yeah, that makes it louder.
Michael, I'm going to interrupt you just for a minute because I see that Wanda
But there's no connection. Nothing is connected.
is technically connected and we're able to hear her audio. No, not anymore. Now it's
She was huddling with her IT team.
huddling with her IT team, exactly. But I know that she intended to recuse herself from this item. And so I guess I should ask Jerry, what is the right thing to do from your perspective? I'm not sure that.
Yeah, I think Wanda should just announce that she's recusing herself because of her husband's relationship with the university.
Okay.
If you could do that, and your mic, you're muted, so if you can unmute your mic.
Host would like me to.
Wanda, could you say that again?
Mute myself, okay.
You're back.
Audio.
Wanda, can you hear us?
I just muted her. I cannot, but I have to say there's something quite strange going on with the attendee list because Wanda was actually on the attendee list, not on the panelist list. So she was showing up in the list of panelists. So our Zoom is a little glitchy tonight.
Yes.
But that in effect, she's recused herself if she's in the attendees list, correct?
Well, yeah, but I don't know why she's showing up on the screen.
Yeah. So I didn't quite catch what she said, but I think we should treat Wanda as having recused herself. She's obviously done this on university application.
And it is a concept review. No vote is being taken this evening. So.
Right. I agree with all of that. I just wanted to note it. And I believe that she was not aware that she was connected to this proceeding. So I'm sorry, Michael, please.
No, that's okay. So I was talking about the location of McCormick Hall, the current home of the Princeton University Art Museum.
Right now, I can't. But to say that you're here. What?
We can hear.
Hi, Wanda.
Hi, Wanda. Wanda, you might want to mute your audio at this point.
It'll never come back.
Okay, here we go. So this is the historic home of the Art Museum. It's been in this location since 1890. The original building was built in 1890, and then an addition designed by Ralph Adams Cram was added to the complex in 1922. A portion of that is along the westerly side of the current complex. And then the remainder of the building was built in the 20th century. There was a large complex which replaced the original 1890 building and a northern portion of the Cram building from 22. And that was all built in 1966. And then there were later additions, one as late as in the 1980s. So that is the current complex. I wanted to give you some context of location. As I told you, it's not far from Nassau Hall, and this is Washington Street over here. Prakash Walk, which is a major east-west walkway on campus, it fronts the museum. And then there's the Diagonal Walk, which cuts across the campus from northwest to southeast. And I'm running my cursor along the Diagonal Walk. It goes right by the southwesterly corner of the current art museum facility. It kind of starts up at Mathey College, almost to University Place, and then it comes down into this complex, which isn't far. It's near the Frisk Campus Center and some other buildings, and down here and towards Washington, the Washington Street corridor. So that is the location of the museum. The project is to largely replace the building, except for retaining the northerly wing, which is the Markland Library. This is the School of Art, and there's classrooms there and faculty offices, as well as the museum. And the complex will be about 142,000 square feet. And the new building will have quite a larger footprint than the current building. So you'll hear about that from the university this evening. The zoning is E1, which is for educational uses. So it's a permitted use in the zone. We're not aware of any variances that will be required at this time. And I think that's about it for now. I know that the project team wants to give you a pretty thorough description of what's being proposed. So I'll hand the screen over to them, and then I'll follow up with some other pieces of information as needed.
Okay, before we hand it over to them, Jack, do you have any comments at all or anything to note? Jack West?
Nope, nothing at this point.
Okay.
Madam Acting Chair?
Yes.
Can you see if you can see, this is my memo, and I have some photographs. I just wanted to show you some of the items that I've mentioned. This is the surviving.
I'm sorry. Well, right now I'm still seeing the map. Are other
okay.
people also
Yes.
seeing the map? Sometimes
You
it takes a
you
while.
have to stop sharing the map and then start sharing the.
Got it, because I want to show you something. Okay, I'll be with you in a second.
Good, thank you.
All right, here we go. Oops, I'm gonna get the hang of this. David taught me well. It's the student's fault, not the teacher. I swear. Well, you know what? Let's just go ahead, and I can bring this up later. It's just some photographs, so I'll hand it over to the university now, if that's okay.
Okay.
Great, thank you. You can hear me, I guess, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I'm Rich Goldman, now known as Faegre Drinker of Biddle and Wreath, as a result of a merger earlier this year. But same face, except for the COVID-19 beard that's been growing since we left office. I'm going to be very brief. We're going to present to you the concept application for our new museum. And you're much better served by having Ron McCoy and James Stewart walk you through it than me. So I'm going to pass it over to, I guess is James going to start?
James will start.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you, and hello, everyone. Nice to see you this evening, albeit under these challenged circumstances. So I'm James Stewart, and I've been director of the Princeton University Art Museum for 11 years now, and have been working on this project, it seems like, for almost the entirety of that time. And indeed, it might be worth knowing that the hope of achieving this project actually goes back some 20 years now. Ron, are you controlling the screen?
Yes.
I want to go to the next slide.
Okay, if we can identify what this is, and this is, I take it, a PowerPoint, just a slide show?
Yes, it's a deck of slides.
Okay, how many slides are there on?
35.
Okay, we'll mark that just as collectively as A1.
And the slides are numbered in the lower left.
Okay.
We're on slide 2.
So for me, certainly, this is a very exciting moment in the evolution of this project. And I actually think a timely one, in that many of the objectives of this project attach to our commitment to issues of equity, inclusion, and access. And I want to begin by really just rather quickly summarizing some of the needs that suggest the importance of moving forward with this project. Over the 11 years that I've been director of the museum, we've been able to more than double attendance in the current facility. For quite a number of years, attendance was in the 90 to 95,000 visitor range each year. In the most recent completed fiscal year, it was just over 206,000. Equally important to the issue of general attendance are the many uses that we make of the museum for academic purposes. These uses prior to COVID were at record levels in terms of, for example, as you see here, the number of precepts held in the Art Museum's object study classrooms. The use of those study rooms now encompasses a very significant number of departments and programs across the university campus, including here, as you see, almost 150 courses in the last year, which included almost 6,500 students. That is not to say those are unique visits. That is not, the whole of the, essentially the whole of the university student population coming for those purposes, but it counts the number of students who come for those reasons on repeat visits. This involved pulling into those study rooms almost 9,000 works of art from art storage for examination, in addition to the works in our galleries. We have capped the attendance at the museum from group visits coming from the K-12 community in our region for over a decade now, because of crowding in the galleries. Because of the fact that in the current building, K-12 use of the galleries is often ultimately at odds with university use and other functions. And these are, as I say, among the challenges we are hoping to resolve. Currently, less than 2% of the collections are on view at any given time. Our collections have grown to essentially span the globe and include over 110,000 objects. Not only is the fact that so little of the collection is visible to a public visitor at any given moment, providing access to the 98% of the collections not on public display is also extremely problematic. Our ability to mount temporary exhibitions, often involving loaned objects, is very severely limited by spatial constraints within the current building. And basically every space within the current complex does at least double, if not triple duty. There are no spaces that truly enable social activity, large-scale events, and so forth, without creating hazards to the preservation and security of the art collections. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just quickly describe both a few of the primary project goals, and then on the next slide, some of the key strategies for achieving those goals. You see here that at the crux of it is a concept that I often speak about of being a kind of town square for the university and the wider communities around us, through which we can engage with the visual arts and the humanities. With the growth in attendance, I think we've already grown our ability to function as a gateway to the university's intellectual resources for visitors and for members of the communities around us. But there are, as I've mentioned already, a number of challenges in doing so. We're seeking, therefore, to significantly enhance access to the visual arts, including creating opportunities for the display of and access to significantly larger portions of the collections. And to my point, very glancingly, about our commitment to equity, we are one of the most globe-spanning museums on a college campus in this country. One of the real challenges of the current building is that it seems spatially to create an unintended hierarchy among the cultures that we collect and engage with. And so one of the project goals is to flatten out that seeming hierarchy in order to present and engage with our collections in a more equitable way. We're looking to certainly increase the use of the museum and our collections for teaching, research, and public engagement, and indeed to provide a welcoming set of educational experiences for a whole array of audiences. On the next. So some of the benefits and strategies for doing this. Many of these derive, it's worth mentioning, from a significant planning study that we undertook about 8 years ago with the California-based architectural firm of Fred Fisher and Associates that really helped us better understand our needs, our opportunities, and indeed to answer the question of whether this could be achieved at the present location. So among the benefits here are creating architecture that itself creates a sense of welcome and engagement, and that opens itself out. The current building, I think, is a very inward-looking building. The new one, we hope, will be very much about overcoming barriers to participation. We want to create architecture that is worthy of the quality of the collections, and I would also add to that of Princeton University and of the communities around us. The building we have, as you've already heard from Michael, is a bit of a hodgepodge in that it was created over a number of different building moments. We also very much want to create architecture that is of our time, but is very responsive to the challenging context of the site, in which there are many circumstances coming together, as Ron will discuss in a little bit. This is also very much about creating a building and spaces within it that enhance access to the collections through very diverse strategies, and we'll get into that as well. I've already mentioned the benefit of placing diverse cultures on an equitable footing, which is really key to the design of this project. We're also committed in doing this to maintaining the physical adjacency between the Art Museum, the university's Department of Art and Archaeology, with which we were essentially co-founded in the 19th century, and with Marquand Fine Arts Library, which is one of the nation's finest fine arts libraries. But in doing so, to separate out some of the functionality so that they are not so much at odds with each other as they have sometimes been in the past. In doing all of this, obviously one of our objectives is to continue to increase the museum's visibility, and to create a building in this physical context that, as we often say about it, is all fronts and no backs. The current building, I kind of joke sometimes, is all backs and no fronts, because it is sometimes even awkward for a visitor to identify the location of the front door. In this location, we really feel that we don't want to turn our back to anything, but rather to invite a porosity that would announce the presence of the museum from all sides. And I think with that, I'm handing this over for a bit to Ron to begin to talk about our team.
That's right. Thank you, James. James and I are going to tag team through this presentation. So we are, I think, well rehearsed, and we will move through it. So to start with an introduction of the design team, I think we have what I would characterize as a dream team for this project. It's a collaboration partnership between Adjay Associates and Cooper Robertson. And you see on the left the very notable project that Adjay Associates did for the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. On the right, you see the Whitney Museum of American Art that Cooper Robertson collaborated with Renzo Piano on. These two firms are currently working together on the Studio Museum in Harlem, which will schedule to be complete in 2021. They're joined on this project by our landscape architect for the campus. As you know, we have a tradition of working with a single landscape architect on all of our campus projects. That landscape architect is James Corner Field Operations. And so with the three of them, we have embarked on this exciting project. I'm now going to just describe a little bit about, to kind of orient you to the campus, picking up a little bit on some of the things that Michael Laplace started to describe at the beginning. This is a diagram or a photograph highlighting the footprints of the different buildings in the upper part of the campus. And I wanted to point out the scale to begin with of the complex that involves the museum, the art and archaeology department, and the Marquand Library that James just talked about. It is one of the largest footprints in this part of the campus, and we are doing a significant addition. And so our challenge is to do that addition in ways that's sensitive to the scale, the texture, the traditions, and the architecture of this particular part of the campus. I also want to reiterate what James said, that this will be a building of our time, a contemporary building. The campus is held together by cohesive and thoughtful planning as one architecture merges and integrates with the next piece of architecture. But nevertheless, just in this upper part of the campus, we have 12 different architectural styles. And on the campus in general, we have 29 architectural styles. You can see here the proximity to Nassau Street. I was measuring distances before this meeting started and would say that the front door of the Art Museum is to Nassau Street as Bent Spoon is to the public library. So it's very proximate and central to the campus. And that's why it's such a wonderful resource for the community. Now I'm going to share with you a very early sketch that David Adjaye did for the project at the very beginning that reflects a response to some of those conditions of the context that I just showed. What you see here is the expansion of the museum, really slightly out on the northeast corner, the southeast corner, and more noticeably on the west side of the existing complex. You see the Marquand Library in a darker shadow here, and the existing home of the Faculty of Art and Archaeology here. The sketch reveals a strategy to compose the museum in a series of pavilions. Each one of those pavilions then is connected to the others, and each one then has the scale of the adjoining buildings. And so the strategy of taking a rather large footprint and transforming that footprint into a series of pavilions that not only enhance the experience of the artwork, but are knitted into the campus architecture is one of the fundamental strategies. You'll also see here some early notations that would then reveal themselves as the design began to evolve. You'll see a note here that says open. That means maintain the open diagonal through the site. So this campus diagonal, which is on a escarpment, historical natural topography of the campus, is an important diagonal that has been noted in the earliest sketch by David Adjaye. And also this entrance here from the north, which is the entrance that goes through the gate on Nassau Street and through the museum and becomes a public way, an art walk that goes north-south and even aligns with the portal at Brown Hall and continues out the backside of Brown Hall. So this connectivity and openness and scale of the building are some of the things that are identified here. And then you'll see a little note here, loading dock. That should have a warning signal next to it. It says, what are we going to do about this loading dock? This is a very active loading dock. There are large tractor trailers that deliver art here, as well as the FedEx trucks and UPS trucks and other kinds of deliveries that come in and out here. And we want to, as James said, make a museum that is all fronts and no backs. This is very much a kind of loading dock backside now, and one of the challenges is to convert that into a backside. I'll talk more about the beautiful, delicate landscape on the eastern side of the building as we go ahead. So this is a refined version of that sketch, primarily by the title of the slide. This is slide 8, talks about weaving the campus pathways. You can see here McCosh Walk, which is the main east-west pathway through the campus, and some of the major pathways just that I pointed out. The north-south walk that will enter through the building and become a public way, a public route through the building, reinforcing this concept of the town square that James talked about. It's complemented by an east-west walk, which is another public route through the building, connecting Prospect House, Prospect Gardens over here to the diagonal walk and to the western side of the campus. And the diagonal walk continues through. It goes underneath this gallery pavilion at the southwest corner and continues along its way uninterrupted through the campus. And then you'll see a little dotted line here indicating the desire to accomplish that loading dock. Now, one of the ways that we always try to ensure the integration of these contemporary buildings in historic contexts is, first of all, to select architects and landscape architects who pay attention to the traditions of the campus and can make a building that's of our time, but also a building that resonates with the historic fabric of the university campus. And I'm going to show you a couple of slides here that the team has developed just to reflect back to us some of these important traditions. And obviously, the traditions of gateways and portals is extremely important in the making of the campus. You can see here that they come in all different flavors. They are simply sometimes portals or gateways on the street. Sometimes they're passageways underneath buildings, which is what we're doing for the diagonal walk. Sometimes they're passageways through courtyards, and sometimes they're passageways through steps. They are both contemporary and traditional, and this is one of the language elements that the design team has picked up on the design of the building. And you'll see as we talk about the north-south and east-west walkways through the campus, through the new art museum, you'll see that there are precedents for them, albeit the new one that we're proposing is an indoor environment that will engage visitors, students, and the community with the art museum experience. Another tradition, this one having to do more with the formal tradition of architecture on campus, is a language that is both collegiate Gothic, but also with a lot of classical overtones. The original plan, or the 1911 plan of the campus by Ralph Adams Cram, is really a City Beautiful Beaux-Arts plan, which is a classical planning tradition, making way for collegiate Gothic buildings. And you again see here some of the characteristics of that architecture, and again, both contemporary and historic renditions, and primarily emphasizing the verticality. Verticality is a sort of transformation of the architectural surface into something that's more light and delicate. And you see it on things such as Robertson Hall and the towers and arcades throughout the campus and at the chapel, even on the existing building, although the existing building is not per se an inspiration for the design that we're doing, and also on the new train station. So this idea of finding an architecture that speaks to the past without imitating the past, that resonates with the campus formal traditions, is something that the team has sort of knitted into their thinking about the project. So this slide illustrates a sort of early formal evolution of those plan diagrams. And so you can see the building taking shape here three-dimensionally. And vertically, it's important to point out that the height of these pavilions, the roof line, the cornice line of these pavilions, is about of the same elevation height as the adjacent buildings and the fabric around it. So not only are they similarly scaled in plan to the scale of existing buildings, but they're similar in height. This plan also continues to show the continuity of the north-south passageway through the building and also the diagonal walk. And here you can begin to see that southwest pavilion lifting up and allowing the diagonal to go through. James talked about the reorganization of the entry sequence and the identity of the museum. This is the pathway that goes connects through the gate on Nassau Street and brings you right to the entrance of the art museum. On the other side of Marquand Library, there will be an entrance into the library itself and into the department offices for art and archaeology. And then you can see this pathway continuing through Brown Hall and connecting through the rest of the campus. Now I want to show a little bit about some of the site making of the campus, and this is really where the James Corner Field Ops team begins to work with the architectural team to knit the building into the fabric and to be responsive to all the different conditions that surround the building that James hinted at in his comments. You can also see here that the actual museum is buried and surrounded by buildings that are really not museum buildings. And so this question of identity is one of the things that James has talked about. I will, as we go forward, I'll talk about the landscape on this southeast and east side of the building. In particular, I would note here the Dawn Redwood, which is a very rare and valuable tree. We've really designed the building around the opportunity to preserve the Dawn Redwood and some of the other historic trees, heritage trees in this part of the campus. I think with that, I'm going to pass it back to James, and he's going to describe some of the events that the museum hosts. James, are you?
Yep, there we are.
Okay.
The reason I think for this little interruption is in a sense a kind of a stress test, and that is to summarize kind of succinctly the range of events that we host in and around the museum, both currently and that we project carrying forward into the future, because it is sometimes the need to accommodate groups of quite varying sizes that shapes some of the spatial considerations of the project, both indoors and out, in terms of how the building sits in the landscape and some of how the landscape is shaped around it. Some of you will probably remember that the site immediately to the west of the current museum project is the host or the site of one of the large reunions gatherings. I can't remember which class year it is by tradition, but it has long been an objective of this project that we would enable that activity to return at the close of construction. What you otherwise see here is something that is really kind of suggestive of the broad range of events that we host, from things that might target as many as 1,000 users, or in the case of the Nassau Street Sampler, as many as 2,000 users on a single evening, to much more intimate events such as the kind of K-12 engagement we do involving class sizes of 20 to 25. Many of these are currently very challenged in the existing facility, not least because the landscape around us does itself pose some challenges. But again, it's to simply help reinforce some of our design objectives and the kinds of gatherings that we are seeking to accommodate.
Great. So now I'm going to then walk through the design of the landscape surrounding the building, and picking up on James's comment to say that this project is very actively programmed around the perimeter. And the challenge here is to accommodate and absorb and facilitate those kinds of functions and events, while still making a campus that's a project that's enjoyable day to day for casual use and for informal use. So it transforms between the everyday informal accommodation to the campus to the kinds of events that James was talking about. I think what we're going to do is maybe begin to walk around the project, if I can, counterclockwise. At the north here, you see McCosh Walk. You see the entrance down into the entrance of the museum. This area called the plinth is a casual seating area. You'll remember that the museum today has a inviting atmosphere of tables and umbrellas that people can linger on around the entrance of the museum. James also talked about the current museum being very inward. This pavilion at this particular gateway moment is very outward looking. So this is the one pavilion, the one gallery space within the museum that has a lot of external views into it to invite patrons and visitors into the museum, and also just frankly to signal that the museum, that you found it, that this is the museum. Continuing around the western side, you see the proposal for the relocation of the Starn sculpture, a very beloved sculpture already that sits on the northeast side of the museum currently. We would put it on this lawn. This is the existing walkway that aligns with the tower at Nassau Hall. Here's the diagonal walk that goes underneath the pavilion in this particular corner. And you see this word that says West Trays. Those are a series of terraces that can be used for the kinds of events that James has, including over 1,000 people for the reunion event that James mentioned. As we continue around the southern side of the site, this is the site that we need to transform from currently a sort of atmosphere of a loading dock into one that feels like a campus walk. And so we have we've tightened the paving here to make it less inviting for parking. And we will restrict parking to a number of disabled spaces here, and then the loading dock situation is tucked into this corner of the museum here. So this will become a pedestrian place, a pedestrian and bicycle environment through which the service vehicles will come to the museum when they need to. The diagonal walk continues in this direction, and then these the pylons that mark the entrance into the Prospect Woods and Gardens are right here. We are creating a new accessible route for ADA compliant passageway, and also a bicycle connection on this side of the museum at the southeast corner. Here's the Dawn Redwood again. This is a sloping lawn that's one of several venue opportunities that would slope down to a screening opportunity for the film events that James has. There are other sites for larger film events that are available in the site. And then as you continue around the northwest corner, it's more of a traditional campus landscape, and then a courtyard entrance into the home of the Department of Art and Archaeology, and also the Marquand Library. I want to talk about accessibility. Accessibility is obviously a huge priority for us, and this drawing shows that every entrance into the museum will be an accessible entrance. So the north-south entrance that goes through the museum and goes through the portal of Brown Hall will have an accessible entrance, a ramp into the museum here, and also a secondary entrance into the museum here. The main lobby space for museum is right here. So both of these accessible entrances will bring people to the the welcoming desk and the main lobby. Obviously, the academic entrance into the department and the library is accessible. Entrances then from the south are accessible. There are some steps at the terraces, but then a ramp parallels those terraces so that each one of the terraces is also available for accessible access. The diagonal walk continues at a level plane, completely accessible throughout the site. Loading dock is accessible, and then this entrance on the east side, which connects to the walkway through the east-west walkway through the building, the art walk, although it is lower than the adjacent grade here at Prospect House, has an accessible pathway that brings visitors down to that entrance there as well. Just focusing a little bit on that southwest corner and the diagonal walk. As you've seen, it's been important in all of our sketches and diagrams from the beginning. This is how it would come through. You can see these little specks here are people gathering in the plaza, but these will become wonderful, also sort of self-shaded and covered events as the building, this dotted white line shows the profile of the building above these terraces on the west side of the building. James, I'm going to now pass it back to you, and you can describe really the experience of the organization of the museum itself.
So I'll try to be somewhat summary here, but I'm happy, or Ron and I know are happy to answer questions later. It's a 3-story complex. This has a dramatic simplification relative to the existing building, which exists on something like no fewer than 19 different floor plates. So there is a dramatic simplification of the program. On the ground floor, as Ron has been discussing, and Ron, you'll need to move your cursor since I can't do that. You see the main entry from the north that leads into a kind of entry experience indicated where the number 1 is. The gallery that Ron mentioned on this floor earlier, which is a little bit of a kind of a glass enclosed prow of the ship that announces the fact of the museum to passersby and hopefully acts as a bit of a lure. Key to this floor of the building is a very significant number of educational spaces of different uses and complexities, all of which are in the kind of salmon color here, numbered 4 and 5. But also to be found on this floor are quite a number of visitor amenities, including an expanded museum store to be found at the number 3. Our idea is to create a building that is essentially zonable so that we can keep this floor of the building open in an operationally affordable way to very extended hours of the day, which would mean that the permeability that Ron has been describing about the north-south and east-west campus walks can really be sustained from dawn, well into the evening, by essentially pushing the majority of the gallery spaces up onto the second floor. So if we go up to the second floor, you will see, without laying it out curatorially, everything you see here are gallery space. This represents a very significant growth in the volume of galleries. Inevitably, we are currently very hard at work thinking about how to distribute collections, temporary exhibition spaces, and so forth, in order to assure that, again, we really have become a museum of the 21st century that thinks very differently about points of intersection, exchange relationships, and so forth, rather than the hierarchies of culture that tended to prevail 100 or more years ago. Worth noting, throughout our intention is that any visitor to this complex should be immediately aware that they have entered an art museum, and indeed a world-class art museum, so that even on the first and third floors, there will be moments for the installation of terrific works of art, so that there's always a kind of visually engaging experience, even in a more permeable set of spaces. But it's this zone of the building that is targeted for the highest levels of security and climate control in order to really allow us to care for the collections going forward. And then on the third floor, there are two, I suppose, primary functions here. Spatially, the smaller one is a cafe function, which I can assure you my staff are particularly excited by. A cafe that we've intentionally sited on the third floor in order to lure visitors up into the building and then give them views out onto the campus. It's scaled to accommodate about 65 users in the indoor space and approximately, I think, about the same number on an outdoor terrace. It also creates a sculpture terrace opportunity. The secondary but larger function is office space for museum staff and for the faculty and staff of the Department in Art and Archaeology. And that's what's indicated in the blue and purple zones here. Otherwise, what you see here are the pavilions that Ron has been describing, which when we get inside a little bit more, you'll get a sense of the kind of volumes of these respective spaces.
Okay, I'm going to walk you through some of the three-dimensional sections and begin to give you a sense of the exterior design, which is evolving at this point. This is a section through the building, through that north-south art walk, looking toward the west. So Makosh Walk would be over here at the right. Here's that entry gallery experience that we've been talking about. This would be the main stair that brings visitors up from level 1 to level 2. There's also an elevator right opposite the welcoming desk here. The art walk continues through the building to the south. This is that north-south connector that then goes through Brown Hall. You can see in this little key plan down through here that it's more or less right through there. And as visitors, students and visitors walk through the museum, or through this art walk, they're invited to look upward and see the collections of the museum in those kinds of above spaces, or as they come through here, they can see through this space into the gallery space or into the entry gallery space. So as you're daily passing through the complex, you're always invited to see up into the gallery spaces and to be surrounded by the artwork. The gallery spaces are quite tall ceilings. I think we're at 19-foot ceilings, which is able to serve the sort of flexibility and curatorial objectives that James and his staff have. James pointed out it's a 3-story building, and that third level is the sort of smaller floor-to-floor plate that's tucked up in the third level and houses the offices and the cafe that James talked about.
Ron, could you go back for a second? I just want to note maybe two things here as you're looking at it in section. It's maybe worth reinforcing that the ground floor is intended to be barrier-free. Visitors coming into that portion of the building would not be required to go through a security check, surrender backpacks, and so forth. It really is intended to be a kind of museum street, if you don't mind that expression. The second thing I would just note is the important variation in the volumes of the gallery size that move between the larger volumes of the pavilion galleries and the somewhat more intimate volumes of the galleries situated between those pavilions. This is an important consideration in fighting museum fatigue, as it's known, and helping people stay kind of fresh and awake and engaged throughout their experience.
I would point out just one other thing I failed to mention, which is the zoning height is 60 feet, and we're well below that zoning height. And you'll see that by the chimney pots beyond, we're more or less at the cornice height of Dodd and Edward. So I'm getting back to the point I made earlier about fitting this building into the scale of the surrounding context. If we look at the outside exterior elevations of the building, we're looking here from the west. In the foreground here, we've removed Dodd Hall just for clarity so that we can get a full view. We're looking along that diagonal walk as it passes on through those western terraces, and then underneath the pavilion at the southwest corner and continuing through the campus here. We're essentially looking through that, externally oriented gallery space that James talked about up at the front here, and the entry space of the museum here, looking pretty much through that north-south walkway that goes through Brown Hall. So we're really through the building enhancing and engaging these important campus pathways. James was also talking a little about dealing with museum fatigue. The galleries themselves, in order to maximize the curatorial objectives, do not have windows on the perimeter because obviously we want to maximize the wall hanging space. The spaces between the galleries are what we're calling lens moments. And they are spaces that invite lingering and pausing and a different kind of museum experience and invite views in to the museum and views outward. This one happens to be showing the cafe on the 3rd floor. This is just another one, a kind of gallery between the galleries, as James was saying, that the galleries are in all of the space within the building. You see here also then the beginning of the evolution of the formal solution to the building. This emphasis on the verticality. This is a sculpted precast facade that will, as we move forward, we're exploring the opportunities to expose and polish the aggregate in certain ways that will enhance the kind of vibrancy and verticality of that facade. So this is, as the design continues, our studies of the fabric and texture of this will continue to evolve. But right now it's positioned to pick up both the traditions of stone and masonry on the campus with some contemporary materials and sort of richness of material, and then also to pick up that tradition of verticality on campus. Moving around then to the southern side of the elevation, you'll see the diagonal walk coming through the large floating space beneath the pavilion in this southwest corner, continuing through the campus here. Brown Hall would be in the foreground here, and that access through Brown Hall to the north-south walk would be through here. Another lens moment over the gap between one of the gallery spaces and the curatorial space that James might want to talk about in this pavilion. Another lens moment here, the loading dock below, with a bit of a terrace. So even when you're inside the building, this overhang here above the loading dock will prevent the short view and encourage the long view. So we're always, as you're in the museum, you're always going to reconnect yourself to the Princeton campus. You're going to know that you're in a special place. We don't want this to be a museum that feels like all other museums. We want it to be a museum that feels particular to the setting of the campus. And then here's that the pylons, the existing pylons that lead to the ADA compliant pathway along the eastern side of the museum. Moving around then to that east side, you see the Dawn Redwood here in the foreground around which the building has been designed, and the beginning of some of the existing trees in the southeast corner of the site. We're looking here toward the landscape as it begins to dip down into that east-west art walk that goes through the building, through this section. Again, the same vocabulary of pavilions and lens moments that invite views in and out between the pavilions. At this corner, which is the northeast corner of the museum, there's a special moment that invites views in and out of the museum as people walk up and down McCosh Walk, so that its identity is again revealed at that moment. And then finally around to the north side of the museum. So if you had come through the gates on Nassau Street, you would be walking continuously down that walkway here into that north-south walk that we've talked about. This is the walkway that really would be open from 8 in the morning till 10 p.m. So all visitors to the campus would have an opportunity to walk through the complex and be encouraged to linger and visit the museum. This is that ground level gallery that's outward looking. There would be signage and identity at this part of the museum. We're still working on that. Separately, on the other side of Marquand Library would be the entrance into the library and to the department offices for art and archaeology. And you can see some of the different materials that are beginning to explore in the spaces between the pavilions. And then just a little bit of a detail as we're beginning to make further refinements of some of the materiality and exploring the craft tradition. So what I was pointing to on the precast material on the outside of the museum, and talking about the sort of sculpted quality of this vertical and the verticality of these panels. Here you get a sense of some of that in one of the lens moments between the galleries. You can see some of the galleries here. You can begin to see some exploration of exposed aggregate or polished aggregate at the tips of these panels, a variation of material here. So there's a kind of richness and sort of nesting of scale as you get to one of these lens moments, which invites views in and out of the museum. A threshold moment between one of the gallery spaces with natural wood floors, a stone threshold moment, and a polished concrete floor transition here. And then another one of those lens moments from the inside looking out, and James can talk a little bit more about this when he gets back on the call here, to talk about the embedded objects that we have incorporated into the museum experience. Maybe you can do that now.
Sure. Do you want to go back then, and I'll just use that illustration to point to that. So I've mentioned that throughout the first and second floors of the building, we want to ensure that visitors are always, in a sense, confronted by great works of art. And the architecture gives us opportunities to embed a number of things throughout the building that would essentially be on display indefinitely, including, as is suggested on the right-hand image here, an ancient Roman floor mosaic that happens to come from one of the great collections of that material in the world. We probably have the richest collection of such things outside of Italy. And we're very much trying to think about how to incorporate them and to create these kind of special moments that sometimes, as here, perhaps blend the kind of barriers of indoors and outdoors, and certainly afford opportunities, and then try to use those opportunities for bringing daylight into the building. Next, Ron. So here is we're on the second floor of the building. You can see in the plan at the lower left a suggestion we're in one of the pavilions. The gallery space you're looking at here is about 4,500 square feet. In all likelihood, it would be a rare moment when the visitor to the museum comes and sees a gallery of this scale uninterrupted. But I think it's useful for kind of understanding the architecture of the space. Ron has already mentioned these are volumetrically very significant spaces with 18 or 19-foot ceiling heights. A lot of incorporation of natural materials. We are very excited to move away from carpeted galleries, which we have in the current building and are an ordeal. The idea here is that this would be some form of hardwood. We haven't yet selected it, so the palette is again not something that one should attach to yet. The ceiling is a kind of glue lamb system that allows us to carry a lot of the utilities in the ceiling and therefore have very clean wall surfaces and floor surfaces for the maximum flexibility in installing the collections. So this is a suggestion of one of these larger volumes. And then the next slide would give you an example of a gallery located, of which there will be many, located between these pavilion spaces that are more intimately scaled. I think these are going to be something in the order of 12 to 13-foot ceilings. For the most part, they won't have the incursions of daylighting into them, which is something we need in many cases for areas of the collections that are too fragile to be in areas with daylight in them. It also is a reflection of the fact that given the diversity of our collections, we have to shape galleries that on the one hand afford a lot of flexibility for the future, but on the other allow for us to really embrace the diverse scale and character of objects in the collections. We haven't said this, but I feel in many ways that what we've done in this project is we've designed an art museum from the inside out, assuring that functionality is kind of top of mind, that we are creating gallery spaces that are really wonderfully rich, inviting, enlivening, and beautifully proportioned spaces for works to be displayed within them. Now we've gone back downstairs for a couple of minutes to give you a kind of feel for one of the two campus walks. It may not be, so easy in plan form sometimes to understand the sheer scale of some of these spaces. Again, the idea here is permeability, is bringing daylighting into a public zone like this, off of which would radiate a number of important functions like the education center I mentioned here. One of the key elements that this campus walk and leads one toward at the intersection with the east-west campus walk is one of the kind of pièces de résistance of the whole project that we have dubbed, for the moment at least, the Grand Hall, which will serve as a kind of multi-purpose space that accommodates everything from large-scale lectures to the kinds of indoor but large-scale events that I was briefly hinting at earlier. but always with the idea that you are put in contact with works of art. If you can see kind of halfway along the walk, embedded in the floor is something that looks reflective. And the idea here is that this might also be a wonderful moment to physically embed into the floor one of these large scale ancient mosaics so that we could actually walk across it and look down into it and really kind of even understand that it was indeed a floor in the ancient world. So here we've actually gone into the grand hall. You get the sense of it as a double height space with daylighting at the top that can be controlled so that when we're using this space for lectures that would accommodate something in the order of 250 users at a time, it could be, the daylighting could be contained in order to have a kind of black box environment for lectures, performances. But you see it here kind of represented as a kind of informal social space, which we expect it to be when it's not being used for lectures and events. As Ron said earlier, always with glimpses up into the gallery sequence, even at the times of day or night when you might not be able to go to the second floor and have the full gallery experience, giving you glimpses so that you're again hopefully lured to come back at a time when the gallery sequence would be open. So that's what you're sort of seeing through the corners of the space there.
Okay, we are nearly finished with this presentation. I wanted to have a moment to add a little bit of a postscript to some of the things that we've been talking about, and to focus a little bit on a discussion of the fabric of the historic buildings on the Princeton campus, and getting back to some of the comments that Michael Laplace made at the beginning. Like a lot of museums around the world, the Princeton University Art Museum has been a site of transformation for more than a century. As James pointed out, here's a plan of the first museum in 1890. I think it was Michael who pointed that out. So it's been a site of transformation. New buildings have been built on the foundations of old buildings. There's approximately a 30-year cycle between each one of these generations of additions and accretion. New layers are joining onto existing layers. And the result is what you might expect from this tradition of 130 years of transformation adaptations. What remains is mostly fragments and pieces. James said that there are 18 different floor levels in the resulting building, the resulting complex. It's a disjointed and problematic museum experience. James and his team have made fantastic use of spaces that are less than ideal. It's unable to serve the needs of today's museum and the future. And what we have here is a once-in-a-century state-of-the-art museum for a restart. To design a building that will serve the community, the regions surrounding the institution, to advance the institution and the museum priorities well into the future, and to really imagine a museum of our time. So this just explains the history of that over time. I want to point out that what's left of the remaining piece of the original Ralph Adams Cram building is this piece here. This facade is the only remaining original facade. The rest of it obviously has been embedded and transformed into the existing, sort of subsequent evolution of the building. And just to put that in the context of where we are with the new footprint, as you can see, it is the museum cannot expand without removing that cram wing. We cannot retain it and build around it. So this is an example, an instance when we're not able to preserve or incorporate that remaining wing into the new museum. But I want to then talk a little bit about the tradition of Princeton and put this in some context. And over the last 274 years of the campus itself, the entire campus has also been a site of transformation. New buildings have been designed to serve new priorities, new institutional initiatives, and new functions, and they've replaced their predecessors. With this slide, I just wanted to illustrate our effort to take every possible opportunity to preserve and steward the campus of the past. If we just look at a more or less 20-year history over the last 20 years, you're not intended to be able to read all these names on the left-hand side of the slide. You can begin to glimpse some of the buildings and landscapes here, but this is over 40 buildings and landscapes in just the past 20 years that we've been able to restore, preserve, adapt, and reuse the historic conditions of those sites and to suit new functions. We always try to do this as our first instinct. We always try to balance the stewardship of the past with the needs of the future and the present. In this particular case, we're not able to do that. And it's not unique. We have had a handful over that same 20-year period of instances where we have taken buildings such as the buildings you see here on the left and transformed the campus into the buildings that you see here on the right. So Hibb and McGee Apartments have become the Lakeside Apartments. The old new quad, an interesting term, has become Butler College. Osborne Fieldhouse became the Andlinger Center. And even more recently, these projects are nearly fresh, but that site has been repurposed for Perelman College. So that's a little bit of just a kind of postscript. As I said, our first instinct is to preserve buildings whenever possible. In this case, it's simply not possible. We would love to be able to preserve a fragment of the Cram facade, but I cannot promise that we're going to be able to do that at this point. So we're going to end here with that same view that James talked about into the museum, the new museum, Princeton University Art Museum. We look forward to your questions and your comments. So thank you.
Thank you. That was, wow, a lot to digest and a very, very interesting presentation. Michael, did you want to say anything before I open, Michael Laplace, open it up for public comment, or do you want to wait until afterwards? You're on mute if you are answering me.
I think I will let the members of the board go first, maybe, and then I'll pick up. I think that would be right.
Okay. So I can only see a few panels to the right side of my screen.
Would you like to, you could suggest, I believe that panelists can raise their hands.
Mm-hmm.
So if you open your participant panel, you'll be able to see if individuals want to say something.
And if you prefer, Ron could unshare his screen so that you might be able to see more.
I think that's a good idea. Thank you.
Sure.
So I don't see any raised hands right now among board members. Tim. I see your raised hand. Tim Quinn.
Tim, you're muted.
Thank you. There are many people who have tried to mute me over the years. I want to touch on something that was in Michael's report. First of all, this is very exciting. I've been in Princeton for 30 years and long visited the art museum. It's a treasure. This is a pretty substantial expansion that's going to allow for a lot more programming, and it's going to attract a lot more visitors, which means that there's going to be more cars driving in our downtown area. And I recall there was concern when the
camera.
I'll let Wanda mute there. All right, great, thank you. I know there was concern when the municipality replaced its parking system, especially coming from the museum, about the effect on attendance at the museum. And I'd really like to know what the plans are for a lot more students during the day and a lot more visitors in addition to the existing events. How are people going to get here? I know Michael's report mentioned, and I don't have it in front of me, I guess I could find it, that the original campus plan called for the museum to go out by the Lewis Center, where there's acres of parking. So anyway, I'll stop making a speech.
James, you might want to talk about the pattern of visitors and
Sure. So let me maybe say a couple of things. First, about the patterns of visitors. we are only, I have to say now, attempting to make somewhat more than just back of the napkin projections about what future attendance might look at like. It's a notoriously difficult art form for museums. Lots of museums, frankly, get it seriously wrong, often by overestimating and overcounting the benefit on earned income. But I think it is worth noting that the majority of our attendance from a public perspective tends to land on Saturdays and Sundays. And we also tend to do most of our larger events either on weekday evenings or weekends during the daytime. Those obviously afford significantly increased parking opportunities, including in the West Garage, which is available, as you know, after business hours and on weekends, as well as visitor parking on the southwest kind of side of the campus. You are correct that we are projecting growth. An important area of growth, we hope, is going to be for K-12 groups coming to visit. First, I think it's worth noting that the building itself will be far more equipped to accommodate them. We will actually have flexible use classrooms in which young students can come and have their lunches and so forth while they're in. So we're a little bit more of a kind of one-stop opportunity. Bus drop-off is intended to remain as it is, essentially along Prospect. So requiring students to enter from the young students to come in from the east side of the campus. And I'm sure Ron will want to say something about the previous iteration of the campus plan. I will simply say that there indeed was a plan at one point that involved a site near the Lewis Center. Sorry, that's my clock. But it was a plan that never called for the relocation of the art museum. It was a plan that modeled the idea of the art museum becoming a multi-site venue. 12 or 15 years ago, there was a concept in which we would have become a 3-site art museum, the third site being on the other side of Route 1. But frankly, these were operationally impossible ideas that weren't fully tested because they would have dramatically increased the operating burden, staffing costs, and so forth for running 3 different venues that would each have had security requirements and so forth. I mentioned at the outset that we did a pretty detailed analysis that goes back about 8 years to really understand the possibilities of our campus writ large, and came to the view that retaining our current location, where we, among other things, have proximity to the vast majority of our humanities partners on campus, was really an outweighing benefit of remaining in the heart of the campus.
I would just add to that the reason I think it's important for James to start by talking about the pattern of use is that you can see it's in the periods when all of our parking lots and garages are open to the public. And so we have more than enough capacity for the events in the art museum, and we think that that people who can come and park in town and patronize the businesses and then visit the art museum as part of a day-long excursion would be a good thing, as long as we have plenty of parking for them, and we do have that. And then we have Tiger Transit, that if anyone wants to visit and park in one of our parking lots on campus, that they are immediately connected to the Tiger Transit system that can bring them almost to the front door of the art museum, which is a pretty rare experience to visit art museums with that kind of access.
Well, good. Thank you for your answers. I wanted to get that. Any discussion of anything in Princeton touches on parking. And so I noticed it was conspicuous in Michael's report. So I think it's very exciting. You are, James, are there plans during construction for additional storefronts in downtown to be repurposed for the parts of the collection a la Bainbridge House?
So that's something that we've been studying. You know, in my dream world, we would take on an additional storefront space for gallery purposes while we're under construction. Obviously, we've all been thrown some pretty huge curveballs in the last few months. You know, sadly, of course, I predict that we'll probably have a few additional storefront opportunities over the next couple of years because of small businesses that may not endure. So right now, I will say we're taking a kind of wait and see outlook on that, Tim. But I think to your question, you know, we're thinking pretty aggressively about how to maintain the museum's vitality during the years of construction, including things like the possibility of curated campus sculpture exhibitions where we use the campus itself as a kind of gallery space. It is, of course, as you remember, one of the reasons that we took on the refurbishment, renovation, restoration of Bainbridge House in order to allow it to function as an art museum appropriate gallery space. That will certainly be one of our kind of small but important anchor locations during construction.
If I can just follow up also, James invited me to say something about the campus planning strategies. The situation that James referred to where a satellite of the museum was proposed as part of the neighborhood around the Lewis Arts Center was part of the 2016 plan. If you look at the current campus plan, the 2026 campus plan, it's not that concept faded away. It actively faded away because James, I think, convinced the institution that the single museum in a single site, and that was really the purpose of the study we did 8 years ago. We gave ourselves a hypothesis, and they said, can the museum in the imagined, serving the imagined program that was anticipated and the growth it required, can that museum exist on this site? And that was the test of that, because this site is still the preferred site because it is proximate to Nassau Street. It's a gateway into campus. As James has said, this is the heart of the humanities, and all the humanities departments are in this vicinity. And so you don't see that older idea of a satellite is not reflected in the current campus plan.
Maybe I'll add one more little note, and that is to say that I think this is one of the reasons that the growth in attendance over the last 10 years is really critical, because it tells us that when we have something compelling and we advertise it appropriately, visitors, including tourists, including members of the communities around us, will seek us out despite the fact that we don't have an edge location. I kind of saw my first years at Princeton as a way of actually testing that hypothesis, and obviously have been really pleased that we were successful in that regard.
Hey there. Can I ask a question?
Well, Julie had her hand raised.
Okay, we're doing it.
Three people had their hand.
Now Julie,
Okay,
Michael, and Owen.
Okay.
And
sorry, don't mean to, but I'll wait.
Okay, Julie, Michael, Owen, and then Zenon. Go
And
ahead.
I'll wait till the members are done.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Well, I really appreciate the presentation. It was very extensive. And I think you made a very clear point about the demolition of McCormick Hall. And although I think it's a good example of Venetian Gothic architecture, I do feel very excited about Sir David Adjaye's work, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the campus. But I was wondering if it does go ahead, what your plans are for documenting and photographing McCormick Hall to, preserve that for research and history.
Great question. We are wrapping up a HABS level documentation of McCormick Hall. So we are following historic preservation standards to fully document the existing building.
Okay, thanks.
Owen?
Okay, I was just wondering, fairly simple question. What is your timeline for moving forward on this?
May I take the first part of that, Ron? No. I'm going to give you the preconditions, and then Ron.
Seems like a simple question, but
well, we are actually beginning the process of starting to sift the movement of art objects, like next week. Because there are so many objects and we have to move some things into remote closed storage locations. So notwithstanding the challenges of social distancing, we're beginning that process. That timetable currently calls for us to close the building to the public around the 1st of February of the coming year. And then I'll let Ron take it from there.
So picking up from there, in around May of 2021, the Marquand Library and the Department of Art and Archaeology will also close. And then beginning soon after, in June of 2021, construction will begin, and it will finish be opening for the fall of 2024 semester.
Okay.
James's strategy is that no student will go through Princeton without at least one semester of a museum experience. Is that right, James?
It is. I've said from the beginning, I won't name the other institutions since this is a public forum, but I have tried to learn from the experience of others where, you know, in other contexts, a museum project of this complexity has taken as long as 7 years to construct. And I simply feel that that's way too long an interruption for the sake of either our students or the communities around us. And so I've said I want every Princeton student as a kind of standard to either have experience of the old museum or the new one during their 4-year tenure.
That is quite the ambitious schedule, I would say.
And we hope to have a full application before the board later this summer.
Did you say later this summer?
Later this summer, yes.
Okay, thank you.
My
Sinan?
turn. Yeah, so on a related note, I think I do apologize if this was mentioned and I didn't catch it, but in terms of, I guess, temporary access to the collection, I know that there's the Bainbridge House, but I was curious what other facilities you might have available to be able to access the collection. And also, I'm just curious how this might relate to the Arts in Transit Village. I guess this is Lewis Arts Center, and like whether that will be used as some sort of you know, gallery space or arts museum as well.
So to take the latter part first, unfortunately, the Lewis Arts Complex was not actually built to a standard of climate control and security that would allow us to use it as a venue. So our focus is going to be on campus in one primary location, and that's Firestone Library, because it does meet those standards. And it, of course, was just itself renovated and upgraded. And we have a lovely kind of reciprocity understanding with Firestone, because it is also, of course, a vehicle for housing and exhibiting special collections. The secondary venue that we will primarily be using for teaching of Princeton students is in a nearby off-campus location where we, a few years ago, built an art storage facility. But for security reasons, we don't tend to publicly talk about its location. It is obviously not in the municipality. But it will serve an important purpose in terms of art storage and in shuttling small seminar precept size classes of students for course-based investigations of objects. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Bainbridge House will figure in that blend as well.
So will the Firestone Library, I guess, area gallery space be have access to the public, or will only be for students?
Well, some of it is, I would say the ongoing use throughout the period of construction would be for academic use. But we've been having discussions with the curatorial staff at the library about the possibility of mounting collaborative exhibitions in the Milberg Gallery, which is part of the publicly visitable portion of Firestone. And we were making some really good progress until early March, and then we just all got distracted by other realities. So I'm hopeful that that will be true.
Thank you.
Please. I find that as co-host, I am not able to raise my hand virtually.
Oh.
Raising my hand physically.
I see you.
Thank you. So I want to, start out with saying the things that I like about this design, and there are a lot of them. I really like the way the basic concept of the pavilions and how that scales the building to relate to the buildings around it on campus. And I also, picked up on the equity, the symbolic equity that you get from those pavilions in the way that you distribute your collections. I really like the way it's knit with the rest of campus, with the landscape around the building and the connections through the building, and the way that those relate to, as you presented, other aspects of campus. I really like the interior renderings that you presented. I think that, you made a statement about designing it from the inside out in a way. And I think that those spaces are really successful, warm, a nice variety of scales. But there's one thing that I really don't like very much about the building, and the goal that you expressed at the beginning about having a building with all fronts and no backs. For one thing, I think that's sort of a dubious goal because I think it's confusing to users, but I also think that you ended up more with a building with all backs and no front. From the exterior renderings, I can't really find the entries. The material treatment with the vertical concrete ribbing has really unfortunate echoes of warehouse type construction from the 1950s, tilt up concrete. And I just feel like the exterior design at this point does not measure up to the rest of the building.
So I think that those are fair observations. I think that the language that we can use at this point in the design and the drawings that we have available to use at this point in the design are not, they lead to that kind of observation. So I think it's a fair comment. I think we are making progress on all that. And when we're coming back to the board for the full presentation, you'll see the sort of fruition of a lot of studies around those issues of materiality and the qualitative aspects of the design that we're beginning to see now as we study with the team and work with the team, that I think will be, and also just the way that we're showing it to you now, it's a little bit cold and abstract. We haven't been able to get down and show you the sort of renderings from the pedestrian scale or the kind of the sort of experiential scale of being around the outside of the building. But I think I hear you. We have those concerns, the team has those concerns, and we're moving, I think, in a really positive direction. So all I can say is let's see how we can meet your expectations around. I appreciate all the things you said about the things that you appreciate. As soon as you started, I knew where you were going. But let's see how we can meet your challenging expectations when we come back.
Sounds good.
I'll make one more point, and that is just specifically that we also share the concern about the importance of the entry experience and how those portals announce themselves. We had a meeting with the architects literally just last week to really push on that point. So that is very much also a focus of our ongoing work.
Thank you. All very good to hear. I think, Michael, it's over to you unless other board members.
Zenon wanted to ask another question.
I did raise my hand again.
Oh, excuse me,
right
Zenon.
way.
I kept checking and I did not see it. I apologize. Go ahead.
Yeah. I guess I do realize this is like more of a courtesy review. We're not getting into the nuts and bolts of the project, but I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit to the sustainability of the project, whether it's going to be a green building, if there's going to be any, other kind of notable green building components to it.
Right. A lot of that, the answer is yes, it will be a very green building. It's also a very energy intensive building. After some of our major laboratories, the museum is one of the most intensive energy buildings on the campus because it has to maintain temperature and humidity controls within a very, very tight specification. And so James talked about the glue laminated structural system in all the galleries. And so the ability to embody visibly principles of sustainability through glue laminated wood construction is the kind of visual sign The building will have high performance envelope to again ensure interior comfort and the collections, but it's also to minimize energy loads, and very sophisticated building systems. So all that is still in design, and we'll be able to report more thoroughly on that when we make our submission for the full application. But and we are designing it we're designing it to the standards of LEED Gold, to meet LEED Gold.
The one thing the one thing we do know is you can't put green roofs on museums because of the artwork underneath.
Yes, good point. So please don't ask us about a green roof.
What about the Renzo Piani? I guess that's not an art museum per se.
Yeah, it's not an art museum. It's a museum with a landscape inside of it.
Wow.
The screen?
The San Francisco.
San Francisco.
Yeah.
Or the Metropolitan Museum of, I think has a green roof, but maybe not over the whole entire
Michael,
thing.
and then so I want to be able to move on to comments from the public. If there are no other planning board questions or comments. Okay, Michael?
Thank you. David, I want to bring up my memo. Can I share a document? David? Guess I can. All right. I know what I just wanted to make.
Telling David he was muted, but I was too.
That's okay. I don't really need it.
Michael, I think you're able to share, or are you?
Yeah, you should not have to be given permission for that. You should have that already.
All right. Let me try this. And then if not, I can just ask my questions straightforward. I don't want to hold everybody up here. It doesn't matter. You have the memo. 3 points I wanted to touch on, going back to Tim's question about accessibility. And we had, just so the board knows, the university was very gracious in having a discussion with me, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, to sort of address some of my concerns that I raised in my memo. And I had a preview of the presentation, and we had a really great discussion. So I really appreciate that. One of the issues I brought up at the time, and I think I'd like to hear them elaborate on this in terms of accessibility to the building. On site, there's only a few parking spaces, and they're right next to the loading dock. And what my concern is access to the museum, since it's not on a public street, for handicapped or seniors, elderly visitors to the museum. And you also mentioned about the popularity with school children. I don't really understand, how do school buses get near this museum? How do they load and unload? Could you talk about accessibility to the building, both for people who need handicap accessible parking or accommodation, and also how do you handle large groups coming in on buses or that sort of thing? Because I don't really understand how that works.
James, do you want to take any part of that?
Why don't you start and I'll leap in.
Okay, so the parking is managed by our events, our transportation parking management office. And for the school children, there are a couple different destinations where students arrive. A lot of them will arrive on Prospect Avenue, so on the east side of the campus, and that's why that's one of the advantages, I'd say, of having the educational suite on that east entrance, and by that landscape moment on the east side of the building. So and there are specifically places for school children to enter the museum there, and have specially designed classrooms for activities that those school children would be engaged in. That's the dominant and the predominant location for the student drop-off. For accessibility, I think that the primary and most convenient mode for those who are not able to walk to the center of the campus would be the Tiger Transit system from any one of the surrounding parking lots of the around the campus. That will take them just to the corner of Elm Drive and McCosh Walk, very proximate to the front door of the museum, probably about as close as one could get to a major art museum in an accessible way.
What I would add is simply that as now, we have a system in which we are indeed able to accommodate needs for drop off, and as you've noted, on a very limited basis, both currently and in future, nearby parking for those with mobility challenges. We're relying on the kind of the advance notice, if you will, the effectiveness of communication to ensure that those coming who do have significant mobility challenges know how we can accommodate their needs. It's worth noting probably too that obviously we are a destination for large numbers of adult groups, not so much at the moment. My understanding is that most adult users drop off on the, or we'd steer them towards the west side so that they come into campus from the opposite direction. It is, as everyone will have noticed, a perpetual challenge to assure that group travel companies know that they are not meant to drop off and linger on Nassau Street. But we do our best we inform everyone we can, apart from those companies and drivers that go rogue.
So large groups and I guess folks that are able to use the small number of spaces by the loading zone, do they have to come up Elm Drive and then take the service drive? How does that work?
Effectively, yes. They would come up Elm Drive. Now, of course, that the gate on the north side is typically closed, they would come up from the south side, make the right turn on the service drive that serves in future and now the back side of the art museum. It is one of the one of many reasons that it's been important to us to really find ways to embellish the design of the south facing treatment so that there is something that feels like an inviting portal into the new museum building from that side as well. And again, it kind of reinforces the point about permeability and indeed, of course, the point of signaling these portals, these entry moments from each side so that they're easily discoverable. The last thing we want is visitors circumnavigating the building, trying to figure out how they go in. The reality is they will have many choices.
Now, that's also, that service drive in Elm is also how trucks will get to the loading zone. How do you, are there certain times that loading is restricted to, or how do you keep it from conflicting with visitor traffic?
So almost all the loading for art museum purposes is scheduled in advance because most of the loading we're talking about is the transport of works of art. If these are transports that we are directly arranging, we arrange them to come outside of peak visitorship hours. Much of that traffic happens, for example, on Mondays at present when the galleries are not open. You could guess there are some functional reasons why that's advantageous. And we imagine strategies of that kind. In the case of most other shipments, they're arranged with commercial art handlers. Almost nothing is left to surprise so that we can accommodate them. It is, it's not, I know, the nature of your question, but it is something that really shapes the service drive and its scale and the landscaping thereof on the south side, because we do have to allow for the turning radius of these very large trucks that are used to transport high value works of art.
All right, thank you. Now I just wanted to ask a couple questions relating to the older part of the existing facility, as well as this sort of touches on David's comments about the exterior that's proposed. On the left is a view looking east at the westerly side of the existing building, which is the surviving section designed in the 1920s by Ralph Adams Cram. And I just wanted to pursue this a little bit more because you said there was really no way to preserve elements of this. And I can't help but think that since this is perfectly in alignment right now with the north-south walk, which is still going to be a major axis within your new building, I mean, this would basically could be the face of the part of the new complex that where your grand hall is. And it just seems like an opportunity. I hope you give it some more thought. There's really such beautiful elements to this facade. Arguably right now, it's the only part of the art museum that people really like, I think, from a aesthetic point of view. I mean, on the left here, look what we're looking at now. I mean, my God, from the 1960s. And I mean, that looks like in the Forrestal Center, and I can say that because I work for Plainsboro, so I can get away with it. But
Michael, Would you mind scrolling back up? And
Yeah,
Ron,
sure.
again, maybe we could both respond to this, but
Sure.
one point of clarification is that in that photo where you're seeing the majority of that west-facing facade, my understanding is that it's only the stone portion to the left of that image that is actually the Cram building.
Right.
What's the yellow?
This is the Cram building, and the rest of it was
This-
designed by faculty in 1928.
Okay, gotcha.
So what we perceive to be the historically significant portion is that fragment of the Cram building in stone that exists to the left. And I think what's maybe particularly important to emphasize is that preserving it as is in situ is not possible because we can't construct around it. As Ron has said, we are still studying and ourselves sharing the desire to find ways to bring elements of the Cram facade back, but we're just not in a position tonight to guarantee that we
Well,
can.
I appreciate that because
Yeah.
I think it's really worthy of us thinking about that. I think, you know, this is a institution designed to celebrate beauty and objects of you know, craftsmanship and why sacrifice something of beauty that's already there. And James, I know you love these balconies because I've seen it and I've seen you quote it. So
I have fantasized about
I know you
preserving
have.
the Juliet balcony, as we call it. Which
I knew I was going to see.
Yeah.
I was going to get you to say that, so I feel like my evening's complete. So, there's
Then
one.
I have nothing to add then, since we've made your evening complete.
Oh, it's not complete, but I'm feeling that.
You know, the other thing, again, I think, Michael, you know this, but maybe we're saying for others, is that unfortunately the building behind the facade of the Cram building is significantly corrupted
Right.
over decades of renovation and reuse and so forth. So that what there is of the historic fabric that is perhaps appealing is that element of the facade. And so that's the piece that we're studying.
I think that makes perfect sense, and I really appreciate you saying that because that's sort of where, I mean, you said it better than I could have, and that's what I was thinking, so thank you for that. The other point I wanted to make is just, it kind of relates to, I thought David made some excellent comments because I really don't have any problem with the programming of the interior and what you're trying to accomplish, but the exterior, particularly of these pavilions, I mean, they're dull. I mean, and on a campus that has such stimulating architecture and the eclectic mix of buildings, it's what's interesting about Princeton's campus and how buildings relate to one another, to just plop these giant squares down. I mean, the most interesting parts of the facade, those spaces in between, those portals and the glass areas, they're recessed. The entrance is recessed, so you can't even see them unless you're standing right in front of that section of the building. So I hope there's going to be more work done on those large blank areas that don't have fenestration, because, you know, the last thing I think an art museum wants to be is boring.
We understand, and I would just echo the response I gave to David, that these are things that the team is focusing on as they refine the design. And I think it's a product of the kinds of drawings we're able to show at this stage of the design are limited and more abstract, and
Understood.
do not begin to show the material richness and detail that we all want and the architects want more than any of us.
Well, that sounds great. And thanks again for giving me the time you've given me to talk about and learn more about the project. I look forward to this process, you know, moving ahead.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to reread the statement that explains to folks who are in the attendee room what the process is for making your voice heard. And I gather that, Michael, if you can unshare your screen.
I'll try.
And David, you will be, for lack of a better word, promoting people to
Correct.
panelists. Okay.
Yep.
Those wishing to comment orally should virtually raise your hand by clicking on the icon at the bottom right of the participant panel, or if participating by phone, by pressing *9. Oral comments will be taken in the order in which hands were raised. Inappropriate public comment containing obscenity, hate speech, or relating to matters not before the board will be immediately muted. If you're having difficulty accessing the speaker, use the Q&A dialog box to let tech support know, and they will try to assist you.
And I just need to make one minor modification. Turns out the raise hand button for attendees is in a different location than it is for panelists. It's actually center bottom of the screen, not in the panelist pane.
Okay, and is it labeled Q&A or is it labeled chat?
No, no, no. The raise your hand feature is labeled raise your hand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right next to the Q&A. Right next to the Q&A.
You know what's unfortunate? By the time we all get really good at this, we'll be back to live meetings. But
I can live with that if that means
I
we
know.
can get back to live meetings.
I'm with you on that, James.
So, David, are there folks who have raised their hands and want to offer a public comment?
There are not.
I'll give it a second just in case they're struggling with their
Finding the raise your hand.
cursor and raising their hand.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
In that case, I will close the public comment portion of the meeting and open up for any further questions or comments from members of the board or staff.
My last comment is that I'm very excited that the university is making this investment, both in their campus, but especially in the community. It's going to bring people to Princeton. It's exactly what we need as part of our economic development strategies, and I'm very excited about it. And I know that it's going to be a wonderful outcome.
Thank you.
That's a good way to close. So I want to thank you, Mr. McCoy and Mr. Stewart and Mr. Goldman, and I've probably left someone out. I'm quickly scanning my screen. It's been really, really interesting. And seeing and hearing no other business, I think it's David's job to
move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Good job, Louise.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so
everyone.
much.
Well done, Louise. Thanks,
Good
Gary.
night.
Thanks, everyone.
Well done.